The digital clock on my Honda's dashboard glowed 11:43 p.m. as I merged onto I-94, leaving behind another 16-hour shift at Children's Hospital. My navy blue scrubs felt damp with perspiration, and the fabric clung uncomfortably to my skin despite Chicago's October chill seeping through the car's aging heating system. The pediatric ward had been chaos tonight, a stomach bug tearing through half the children, leaving me and 2 other nurses to handle what should have been a full staff's workload. Exhaustion pulled at my bones like gravity, making my eyelids heavy and my shoulders ache. I rolled them back, trying to work out the knots that had formed from hunching over tiny patients for hours. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed exactly what I expected. Emma Walsh at 26, looking every one of her years plus a few extra. Dark circles shadowed my blue-gray eyes, and my auburn hair had escaped its ponytail in wisps that framed my face like a halo of fatigue. The highway stretched ahead, dark and mostly empty, except for the occasional semi-truck hauling cargo through the Chicago night. Their headlights created brief moments of artificial daylight before plunging me back into darkness. I preferred the night shift, honestly. During the day, the hospital buzzed with administrative staff, visiting families, and doctors making their rounds with students trailing behind like ducklings. At night, it was just the essential personnel and the patients who needed us most. My phone buzzed against the passenger seat, vibrating against the cracked vinyl. Tyler, probably. My 17-year-old brother had developed an annoying habit of staying out past curfew since Dad died 6 months ago in that construction accident. I understood grief made people do unpredictable things, but I couldn't shake the worry that gnawed at me whenever he wasn't home where I could see him, could know he was safe. I reached for the phone without taking my eyes off the road, muscle memory guiding my fingers to the device. Unknown number. At this hour, it was probably someone calling the wrong number, or a telemarketer working graveyard shifts to reach people like me. I let it go to voicemail and dropped the phone back onto the seat. The exit for our neighborhood appeared ahead, marked by a flickering streetlight that the city had been promising to fix for 3 months. I moved into the right lane, my turn signal clicking rhythmically. Almost home. Almost to the cramped 2-bedroom apartment where Tyler would either be asleep in his room with textbooks scattered across his desk, or awake in the living room pretending to do homework while actually playing video games with the volume turned down low. The thought of home brought with it the familiar weight of responsibility. There would be bills on the kitchen table, unopened because I already knew what they said. Past due notices from the electric company, the credit card I'd maxed out paying for Dad's funeral, the student loans that followed me like shadows, no matter how many double shifts I picked up. Tomorrow, I had an interview for a weekend position at a private clinic, which would bring my total weekly work hours to somewhere around 70. That's when I felt it. A subtle pulling sensation in the steering wheel, like an invisible hand was trying to guide the car left toward the median. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles going white against the worn steering wheel cover. The pulling intensified, and my heart rate spiked as I realized something was very, very wrong with my car. The tire pressure monitoring system should have warned me, but the light had been broken for months. Just another repair I couldn't afford. Another corner cut to keep us fed and housed. The Honda was 12 years old with over 200,000 miles, held together by prayers and preventive maintenance. I performed myself using YouTube tutorials. The steering wheel jerked violently to the left as the front right tire exploded, with a sound like a gunshot echoing through the car. The Honda veered sharply toward the concrete barrier that separated the highway from a steep, tree-lined embankment. I yanked the wheel in the opposite direction, adrenaline flooding my system, but the overcorrection sent the car into a wild fishtail across both lanes of the highway. Time fractured into slow-motion horror. I could see every detail with crystalline clarity. The way the headlights swept across the guardrail like a lighthouse beam. The spiderweb crack that appeared in my windshield from the stress. The coffee cup in my console that launched itself into the air. My medical training kicked in, and part of my mind began cataloging potential injuries, even as I fought for control. The car hit the guardrail at a 30-degree angle, metal screaming against metal in a shower of sparks that lit up the darkness like the 4th of July. The Honda's front end crumpled, but the momentum carried us through the barrier and over the edge of the embankment. Then I was airborne, suspended in a moment of terrible weightlessness, where gravity hadn't yet remembered I existed. The world turned upside down. Glass exploded around me as the Honda rolled once, twice, 3 times down the 40-foot slope. My body slammed against the seatbelt with each rotation, and I felt something pop in my left shoulder. The airbag deployed with a bang that left my ears ringing, the chemical smell of the inflator mixing with the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. The car finally came to rest against a cluster of oak trees with a sound that would be etched into my nightmares forever. Assuming I lived to have nightmares. The engine made horrible dying sounds before falling silent, leaving only the tick of cooling metal and the drip of fluids I didn't want to identify. When the chaos stopped, I was hanging upside down, suspended by my seatbelt like a broken marionette. Blood from a cut on my scalp dripped steadily onto the crumpled roof below me, each drop creating a small crimson splash on the beige fabric. My left arm hung at an unnatural angle, sending bolts of white-hot agony through my shoulder with every heartbeat. The dashboard lights had gone out, but moonlight filtering through the shattered windshield provided enough illumination to assess my situation. It wasn't good. The driver's side door was compressed against a tree trunk, and the passenger side had buckled inward from the rolling. I was trapped in a metal coffin 50 feet down from the highway, where the sound of my crash had been swallowed by the night. Then I smelled it. Gasoline. Sweet and cloying and absolutely terrifying in the confined space. The fuel tank had been compromised, and I could hear a steady dripping sound that made my heart race with panic. Every breath brought more of the fumes into my lungs, and I knew that a single spark could turn my metal coffin into a crematorium. I tried to reach for my seatbelt release with my right hand, but my fingers felt disconnected from my brain, clumsy and unresponsive. Shock was setting in. I realized with the detached part of my mind that stayed clinical even in crisis. Blood loss, trauma, possible concussion. I needed medical attention, and I needed it fast. "Help!" I tried to call out, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. My throat felt raw and damaged, either from the impact or from breathing in airbag chemicals. I tried again, louder this time. "Help me!" The sound seemed to die just feet from the car, swallowed by the trees and the distance to the highway above. No one would hear me. No one would even think to look down here. Tyler would eventually call when I didn't come home. But by then, the gas fumes would either have overcome me or turned me into a fireball. The thought of my brother coming home to an empty apartment, wondering where I was, waiting for someone who would never walk through the door again, gave me a surge of desperate strength. I had to get out. I had to survive. Tyler had already lost our parents. He couldn't lose me, too. I was reaching for the seatbelt again when I heard it. Footsteps on gravel, heavy and purposeful, picking their way down the embankment with careful precision. Hope flared in my chest like a struck match. Someone had seen the accident, had stopped to help. I was going to be okay. "Help," I managed to croak, putting all my remaining strength behind the word. "I'm trapped down here." The footsteps stopped directly beside what remained of the driver's side window. I couldn't turn my head enough to see clearly without sending lightning bolts of pain down my spine, but I caught a glimpse of expensive leather shoes. Italian leather, if I had to guess, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the moonlight. Not the steel-toed boots of a construction worker or the practical sneakers of someone just trying to help. These were shoes that cost more than I made in a month. "Jesus Christ," a voice said, and it was like velvet wrapped around steel, deep and controlled, with an accent that definitely wasn't Chicago, something smoother, more refined, East Coast maybe, or European influence. "What the hell were you doing out here?" It wasn't really a question directed at me, more like he was having a conversation with himself, trying to piece together how a pediatric nurse had ended up upside down in his vicinity at nearly midnight on a Friday. I heard the crunch of safety glass under his feet as he moved to get a better angle, assessing the situation with what sounded like professional efficiency. "Sir, please," I whispered, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. "I can't feel my left arm. The car smells like gasoline." Silence stretched between us, filled only by the continued dripping of fuel and the distant hum of traffic on the highway above. Then, so quietly I almost missed it, he spoke again. This wasn't an accident. I woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and the soft murmur of voices speaking in a language that definitely wasn't English. My body felt like I'd been hit by a freight train, every muscle aching in ways I didn't know were possible. The bed beneath me was impossibly soft, wrapped in sheets that felt like silk against my skin. Nothing like the rough cotton ones I'd bought at Target 3 years ago and still used at home. Home. Tyler. The memory of the accident came flooding back in vivid detail. The tire exploding, the car rolling down the embankment, the smell of gasoline, and then him, the man with the expensive shoes, and the velvet voice who'd said it wasn't an accident. I tried to sit up, and immediately regretted it, as pain shot through my left shoulder like lightning. My arm was in a sling, professionally bandaged, and when I touched my head, I found more bandages covering what felt like stitches along my hairline. I wouldn't move too quickly if I were you. The voice came from the corner of the room, and I turned my head carefully to find its source. A man in his early 60s sat in an expensive-looking chair, a medical bag at his feet, and a kind smile on his weathered face. "You've suffered a concussion, 3 cracked ribs, and a dislocated shoulder. You're lucky to be alive, Miss Walsh." He knew my name. How did he know my name? I tried to speak, but my throat felt like sandpaper. The doctor, because he was obviously a doctor from the way he moved and spoke, noticed my distress and poured water from a crystal pitcher into a matching glass. "Small sips," he instructed, helping me hold the glass with my good hand. The water was ice cold and tasted better than anything I'd ever experienced. "I'm Dr. Castellano. I've been taking care of you for the past 14 hours. 14 hours. Tyler would be frantic by now. I had to call him, had to let him know I was alive. I looked around the room, taking in details that seemed to belong in a luxury hotel rather than a hospital. Mahogany furniture, original artwork on the walls, and windows that looked out over manicured gardens that stretched as far as I could see. "Where am I?" I managed to croak. Dr. Castellano exchanged a glance with someone behind me. I turned as much as I could without aggravating my injuries, and felt my breath catch in my throat. A man stood near the doorway, arms crossed over a chest that filled out a charcoal gray suit like it had been tailored specifically for his body, which, given the obvious quality of the fabric, it probably had been. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with black hair styled in a way that looked effortless, but probably cost more than my monthly rent. His skin had an olive tone that suggested Mediterranean heritage, and his eyes were the most unusual shade of gray-blue I'd ever seen. A small scar marked his chin, a thin white line that only added to his dangerous appeal. Because that's what he was, I realized with a certainty that went beyond logic. Dangerous. Everything about him screamed power and control, from the way he held himself to the expensive watch on his wrist, to the way Dr. Castellano deferred to him without saying a word. "You're in my home," he said, pushing off from the doorframe and moving closer to the bed. His voice was exactly as I remembered from the accident, smooth and controlled with that hint of an accent I still couldn't place. "You're safe now. My home. Not a hospital. Not a hotel. His home." I looked around the room again with new eyes, taking in the personal touches I'd missed before. Family photos on the dresser, too far away for me to make out faces. A leather-bound book on the nightstand with a bookmark halfway through. This was a guest room, but in someone's private residence. "I need to call my brother," I said, trying to project more strength than I felt. "He'll be worried sick. Already taken care of." The man moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back as he looked out over the grounds. "Tyler Walsh, 17 years old, junior at Lincoln Park High School. He's been informed that you were in an accident and are recovering safely. He believes you're at Northwestern Memorial." Ice flooded my veins. He knew about Tyler. Not just his name, but his age. His school. How? Why? And what did he mean Tyler believed I was at the hospital? "Who are you?" I demanded, though demand might have been too strong a word for the whisper that came out of my damaged throat. He turned from the window, and those unusual eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made me want to look away. I didn't. Something told me that showing weakness to this man would be a mistake I might not survive. "My name is Salvatore Romano," he said, as if that should mean something to me. When I didn't react with recognition, something that might have been amusement flickered across his features. "And you, Emma Catherine Walsh, are exactly who I thought you were. Dr. Castellano cleared his throat discreetly. If you'll excuse me, Mr. Romano, I should check on the young lady's bandages. Salvatore nodded once, a gesture of dismissal that the doctor accepted without question. As he approached the bed with his medical bag, I noticed his hands shaking slightly. Not from age or illness, but from something else. Fear, maybe. Or nervous respect for the man who'd just left us alone. Your injuries are healing well, Dr. Castellano said, unwrapping the bandage on my head with practiced efficiency. The cut required 12 stitches, but it was clean, no sign of infection. The shoulder will take longer, but you'll have full range of motion eventually. How long do I have to stay here? I asked, wincing as he prodded at the stitches. That's not my decision to make, he replied carefully. And there was something in his tone that sent another chill through me. Mr. Romano will discuss that with you when you're feeling stronger. When he finished his examination, Dr. Castellano packed his instruments with the same nervous efficiency he'd shown throughout the visit. I'll be back this evening to check on you again. Rest, drink plenty of fluids, and don't try to get up without assistance. He paused at the door, looking back at me with something that might have been pity. Miss Walsh, Mr. Romano is not a man to be trifled with. My advice would be to listen carefully to what he tells you, and remember that his protection comes with expectations. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the luxurious prison that Salvatore Romano called a guest room. I sat in the silence for several minutes, trying to process everything that had happened. The accident, waking up in a stranger's home, the ominous warnings about protection and expectations. I managed to swing my legs over the side of the bed, biting back a groan as my ribs protested the movement. The room spun for a moment, but I breathed through it and waited for my vision to clear. A silk robe had been laid out on the chair beside the bed, along with clothes that definitely weren't mine. Designer jeans in exactly my size, a cashmere sweater in deep blue, even underwear still in packaging from brands I recognized but couldn't afford. How did he know my size? How long had I been unconscious? And why did Salvatore Romano have a complete wardrobe waiting for me like he'd been expecting my arrival? I made it to the window on unsteady legs, using the wall for support. The view outside took my breath away. Manicured gardens stretched for acres, complete with fountains and walking paths that disappeared into groves of mature trees. In the distance, I could see the outline of what looked like a tennis court and a swimming pool that belonged in a resort magazine. But it was the men that made my blood run cold. They were stationed throughout the grounds, trying to look casual but failing miserably. Black suits, earpieces, the telltale bulge of weapons concealed under their jackets. I counted at least 8 from my vantage point, and I suspected there were more I couldn't see. This wasn't a home. This was a fortress, and I wasn't a guest recovering from an accident. I was a prisoner who just didn't know what crime I'd committed yet. The door opened behind me, and I didn't need to turn around to know who had entered. The very air in the room seemed to change, becoming heavier, more charged with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. You should be resting, Salvatore said, his voice closer than I'd expected. He'd moved silently across the room, and now stood just a few feet behind me. I needed to see where I was, I replied, not turning around. If I was going to be a prisoner, I wasn't going to cower. Nice view. Very secure. A soft chuckle came from behind me. Security is a necessity in my line of work. And what line of work is that, exactly? Construction, he said smoothly. I build things. Create stability where there was none before. I finally turned to face him, using the window frame for support. He was holding a manila folder, thick with papers that I somehow knew contained information about me. About my life, my work, my family. The thought made me sick. You have 15 men with guns watching your garden, I said. That's not construction. That's something else entirely. Those gray-blue eyes studied me with renewed interest. You're observant. Most people in your situation would be too grateful to be alive to ask uncomfortable questions. I'm a nurse, I replied. I notice details. It keeps my patients alive. And what details have you noticed about me, Emma? The way he said my name, soft and intimate like we were old friends instead of strangers, made something flutter in my chest that I absolutely did not want to examine. I've noticed that you have a file on me. I've noticed that you knew exactly what size clothes to buy. I've noticed that everyone in this house is afraid of you." He moved closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Expensive, with notes of cedar and something darker that I couldn't identify. Close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. "You can't leave," he said simply. "Not until I'm sure you're not in danger." "Danger from what?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "From whoever tried to kill you last night." 3 days in Salvatore Romano's mansion felt like 3 weeks. The luxury was suffocating in its perfection. Every meal arrived on bone china that probably cost more than my monthly salary, prepared by a chef whose name I never learned, but whose food tasted like it belonged in a 5-star restaurant. The clothes that appeared in the walk-in closet each morning fit me perfectly, from Italian designer jeans to cashmere sweaters in colors that complemented my complexion in ways my Target wardrobe never had. I should have been grateful. Instead, I felt like a doll being dressed and fed by an invisible hand, my every need anticipated before I could voice it. The gilded cage was still a cage, no matter how beautiful the bars. "You're not eating," Salvatore observed from across the dining room table. It was large enough to seat 12, making the intimate breakfast feel absurdly formal. He sat at the head like a king, immaculate in a navy suit that probably cost more than Tyler's entire college fund. I pushed the eggs Benedict around my plate, my appetite non-existent despite the exquisite presentation. "I'm not hungry. You need to keep your strength up. Your body is still healing." "My body would heal just fine at home," I replied, finally meeting his gaze. Those gray-blue eyes studied me with the same intensity they had for the past 3 days, like I was a puzzle he was determined to solve. "Home isn't safe for you right now." "So you keep saying, but you haven't explained why." I set down my fork with more force than necessary, the sound echoing in the cavernous room. "You said someone tried to kill me. Who? Why? And don't give me another vague non-answer about danger." Salvatore was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming silently against the pristine white tablecloth. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made my skin prickle with unease. "Your father owed money to some very dangerous people, Emma. $80,000 in gambling debts and loans he took out to pay for your mother's cancer treatments." The words hit me like a physical blow. Dad had always been careful with money, almost obsessively so after Mom's medical bills started piling up. The idea that he'd been gambling, borrowing from loan sharks, felt impossible to reconcile with the man who taught me to balance a checkbook when I was 12. "You're lying," I whispered. But even as I said it, pieces began falling into place. The mysterious phone calls he'd taken in another room, the way he'd grown increasingly stressed in the weeks before the construction accident, the cash he'd somehow found to keep us afloat when his disability payments weren't enough. I wish I were. Salvatore reached into his jacket and withdrew a photograph, sliding it across the table toward me. "This is Victor Kozlovsky. He's the man your father borrowed from." The photo showed a middle-aged man with pale skin and cold eyes, standing outside what looked like a nightclub. He was unremarkable in every way, except for the cruelty that seemed to radiate from his expression, even in a still image. "Russian?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Bratva, the most ruthless branch of organized crime in Chicago." Salvatore's jaw tightened. "When your father died, that debt transferred to you. Victor has been patient, but patience has limits." My hands started to shake, and I pressed them flat against the table to hide the tremor. $80,000. "I don't have $80,000. I don't have $8,000. Victor doesn't care about your financial situation. He cares about sending a message to other debtors about what happens when obligations aren't met." The eggs Benedict turned to ash in my mouth. "The accident. You said it wasn't random. Your tire was sabotaged. A small puncture that would fail under highway speeds, designed to look like a blowout." His voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather instead of attempted murder. "If I hadn't been in the area, if I hadn't heard the crash," he didn't need to finish. "I'd be dead, and Tyler would be alone in the world, probably next on Victor's list." "Why were you there?" I asked. "In the area, I mean. That's not exactly a residential neighborhood." Something flickered in his expression, gone too quickly for me to interpret. "I own property nearby. I was conducting business." "Business. At midnight on a Friday. The kind of business that required 15 armed men and a fortress disguised as a home. What kind of construction do you do, Salvatore? He leaned back in his chair, studying me with those penetrating eyes. The kind that requires careful planning and attention to detail. The kind where mistakes can be fatal. It wasn't an answer, but it was more honest than anything else he'd told me. I appreciated the acknowledgement that we both knew his construction company was a front for something darker. I need to call in sick to work, I said, changing the subject, because I wasn't ready to examine what it meant that I was having breakfast with a man who was almost certainly a criminal. They'll fire me if I don't show up for 3 days without notice. Already handled. You requested extended leave due to stress following a car accident. Very understandable, given the circumstances. The casual way he'd taken control of my life should have been infuriating. Instead, I felt a treacherous flutter of relief that someone else was managing the details I was too overwhelmed to handle. You can't keep me here forever, I said, though it sounded weak even to my own ears. I can keep you alive. Everything else is negotiable. After breakfast, I retreated to the library, a room that had become my refuge over the past 3 days. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held thousands of books in multiple languages, and a fire crackled in the marble fireplace despite the October warmth outside. It was the one room in the house that felt lived in, rather than staged for a magazine photo shoot. I discovered that Salvatore was an actual reader, not just someone who kept books for show. Dog-eared pages, handwritten notes in the margins, multiple bookmarks scattered throughout various titles. The eclectic collection ranged from classic literature to business strategy to books on Renaissance art that were so specialized they had to be special orders. I was curled in the leather armchair by the window, trying to lose myself in Jane Austen, when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Not the soft, deferential steps of the household staff, but the confident stride of someone who owned everything he walked on. Salvatore appeared in the doorway, no longer wearing the navy suit from breakfast. He'd changed into dark jeans and a black sweater that clung to his broad shoulders in a way that made my mouth go dry. The casual clothes should have made him seem more approachable. Instead, they revealed the powerful physique that the tailored suits had only hinted at. "You're bleeding," I said, noticing the red stain spreading across his left sleeve. He glanced down as if just noticing the injury himself. "It's nothing." My medical training overrode my common sense, and I stood up too quickly, wincing as my ribs protested. "Let me look at it." "Emma, it's fine. You're dripping blood on a Persian rug that probably costs more than my car. It's not fine." I moved toward him, noting the way he tensed as I approached. "Sit down. Let me see." For a moment I thought he would refuse. Then he moved to the couch, sitting on the edge like he was ready to bolt at any second. The vulnerability in the gesture was so at odds with his usual commanding presence that it made my chest tight. I perched beside him, close enough to smell that intoxicating cologne mixed with something sharper. Copper. Blood. "This is going to hurt," I warned, reaching for his sleeve. He caught my wrist, his fingers circling it completely. The touch sent electricity shooting up my arm, and I had to force myself to breathe normally. "I don't want you to see this," he said quietly. "See what?" Instead of answering, he released my wrist and pushed up his sleeve, revealing not just the fresh cut I'd noticed, but a canvas of scars that mapped a violent history. Bullet wounds, knife marks, what looked like burns from cigarettes or other implements of torture. His forearm told a story of survival that no construction worker should have to live. "My God," I whispered, my fingers hovering over the worst of the scars without quite touching. "What happened to you?" "I told you. I build things. Sometimes people object to my construction plans." The cut that had drawn my attention was deep but clean, probably from a knife rather than an accident. I examined it with professional detachment, though inside I was shaking at the evidence of how dangerous his world really was. "This needs stitches," I said. "I've had worse. That's not the point. Infection could set in, and with your lifestyle, I doubt you have time to deal with complications." I looked up to find him watching me with an expression I couldn't read. "I can do it. I've sutured hundreds of wounds." He was quiet for so long I thought he would refuse. Then, "There's a medical kit in my office, top drawer of the desk." 20 minutes later, I was bent over his arm with a needle and surgical thread, working by the light of the desk lamp. He hadn't made a sound during the procedure, hadn't even flinched when I injected the local anesthetic. I'd treated soldiers who were less stoic about minor injuries. "There," I said, tying off the last stitch. "Keep it dry for 24 hours, and change the dressing daily. Thank you." I looked up to find his face inches from mine, close enough that I could see the gold flecks in those unusual eyes, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath against my cheek. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. The air between us crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with the injury I'd just treated. Then he pulled back, rolling down his sleeve with careful precision. "You should rest. Dr. Castellano will be here soon for your evening check." I nodded, not trusting my voice. As I headed for the door, he spoke again. "Emma," I turned back. "The people who want to hurt you, they won't stop. Not until they're dead or you are. I need you to understand that." "I understand," I said, though I wasn't sure I understood anything anymore. "Do you? Because once you're under my protection, really under it, there's no going back. My world has rules, and breaking them has consequences." I met his gaze steadily. "Are you asking me to choose? I'm telling you that the choice is coming, and when it does, you need to be certain, because I don't let go of what's mine." The possessive edge in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, it sent heat spiraling through my chest in a way that terrified me more than any Russian gangster ever could. The tension in the mansion had been building for days, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. Salvatore's men moved with heightened alertness, their conversations conducted in hushed tones that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. Even the household staff seemed on edge, their usual efficient silence replaced by nervous energy that made my skin crawl. I was curled up in the library reading when Salvatore burst through the doors, his face dark with an emotion I'd never seen before. Fear. Not for himself, but for something else entirely. His gray-blue eyes found mine immediately, and the intensity in them made my breath catch. "We need to talk," he said, crossing the room in 3 long strides. "Now." I set down my book, noting the rigid line of his shoulders beneath the black sweater he wore. "What's wrong?" Instead of answering, he moved to the massive desk in the corner and withdrew a manila envelope. The same type that had contained my personal information days ago, but this one was thicker, heavier with whatever secrets it contained. "Viktor Kozlovsky isn't just after you for your father's debt," he said, placing the envelope on the coffee table between us. "It's more complicated than that." My hands shook as I reached for the envelope. Inside were photographs, documents, and what looked like surveillance reports. The first photo made my blood run cold. It was Tyler, walking out of Lincoln Park High School with his backpack slung over one shoulder, completely unaware that someone was watching him through a telephoto lens. "They've been following him," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the crackling of the fire. "For how long?" 3 weeks. Salvatore's jaw was tight with controlled rage. "Ever since your father's death became public knowledge." I flipped through more photos. Tyler at the grocery store, Tyler at his part-time job at the movie theater, Tyler laughing with friends outside a pizza place. Each image was a violation, proof that my brother's life had been under scrutiny while I'd been obliviously working double shifts and worrying about bills. "There's more," Salvatore said, his voice gentler now. "Emma, your brother has been contacted by them." The envelope slipped from my numb fingers, spilling its contents across the Persian rug. Among the scattered papers was a transcript of what looked like a phone conversation. Tyler's name at the top of the page in stark black letters. "They threatened him," I said, the words coming out flat and emotionless as shock set in. "They told him he had to help them get to me. Victor gave him a choice: cooperate, or watch his sister die the same way his father did." The implication hit me like a physical blow. Dad's construction accident hadn't been an accident any more than my car crash had been. Viktor Kozlovsky had orchestrated both, turning murder into convenient cover stories that no one would question. Tyler would never... I started, then stopped. What did I really know about what my 17-year-old brother would do when faced with losing the only family he had left? Grief and fear made people do things they never thought possible. He gave them information about your schedule, your route home from work. He installed a GPS tracker in your car. Salvatore's voice was clinical, professional, but I could see the anger burning in his eyes. He didn't know it would cause the accident. Victor told him they just wanted to know where you were. I closed my eyes, trying to process the betrayal. And Tyler, my baby brother who I'd raised since he was 14, who I'd sacrificed everything to protect, had handed me over to killers because he was scared. The rational part of my mind understood why he'd done it, but my heart felt like it was being torn apart. Where is he now? I asked. Safe, for the moment. Salvatore gathered the scattered papers, organizing them with mechanical precision. My people are watching him, but Victor's patience is running out. The original plan was to use the information Tyler provided to grab you quietly, extract what they needed, and eliminate both of you. When that failed, they moved to more direct methods. What kind of direct methods? He handed me a new photograph, this one taken from a security camera. It showed the parking garage at Children's Hospital, 3 men in dark clothing positioned near my usual parking spot. They were waiting for me to return to work, ready to finish what the sabotaged tire had started. They came to the hospital. I breathed. Looking for me. Yesterday. My men intercepted them before they could get close. His tone was matter of fact, but the weight of what he wasn't saying settled over me like a shroud. Intercepted. Not arrested, not warned away. Intercepted in the permanent sense. You killed them. I protected what's mine. The possessive declaration should have terrified me. Instead, it sent heat spiraling through my chest, a treacherous warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the marble hearth. I'm not yours, I said. But the words lacked conviction. Salvatore moved closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, could see the gold flecks in those storm-gray eyes. Aren't you? You're in my house, eating my food, wearing clothes I bought for you. You sutured my wounds with your own hands. If that's not mine, what would you call it? I couldn't answer, because he was right. Somewhere in the past few days, the lines had blurred beyond recognition. I was no longer just a patient recovering from an accident or a potential victim seeking protection. I had become something else entirely, something that didn't have a name, but felt dangerously close to belonging. What happens now? I asked instead. Now we end this. Victor thinks you're dead or hiding. As long as he believes that, Tyler is safe. But eventually he'll realize his original plan failed and start looking for alternatives. Alternatives like torturing my brother until he tells them where I am, among other things. His expression darkened. Victor Kozlovsky isn't known for his restraint when business doesn't go according to plan. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the gardens. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the manicured grounds. In the distance, I could see Salvatore's men patrolling the perimeter, their movements coordinated and professional. An army disguised as landscaping staff. I want to see him, I said. Tyler, I want to see my brother. That's not possible right now. I spun around to face him. Why not? You said he was safe. Safe, yes. But bringing him here would compromise the security of this location, and taking you to him would put you both at risk. The reasonable explanation did nothing to ease the ache in my chest. Tyler was probably terrified, probably blaming himself for what had happened to me, and I couldn't even call him to let him know I was alive. He thinks I'm dead, doesn't he? The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The hospital, Northwestern Memorial. They told him I died from my injuries. Salvatore's silence was answer enough. You let my brother think I'm dead. The words came out as a shout. Months of stress and fear and exhaustion boiling over into rage. He's 17 years old, and you let him believe he lost the only family he had left. It was necessary, Salvatore said calmly, though I could see tension in the set of his shoulders. Victor's people are watching Tyler closely. Any sign that you survived would put him in immediate danger. So what's the plan? I stay hidden forever while my baby brother grieves for a sister who isn't actually dead? The plan is to eliminate the threat. Permanently. The quiet finality in his voice sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't a business negotiation or a territorial dispute. This was war, and Victor Kozlovsky had made the fatal mistake of targeting someone under Salvatore Romano's protection. You're going to kill him, I said. Not a question. I'm going to end a problem that should have been resolved months ago. He moved to pour himself a whiskey from the crystal decanter on the sidebar, the amber liquid catching the firelight like liquid gold. Victor crossed a line when he involved you and Tyler. That kind of mistake requires a permanent solution. I should have been horrified by his casual discussion of murder. Instead, I felt a savage satisfaction that someone was finally going to make Victor pay for what he'd done to my family. The emotion scared me more than Salvatore's threats ever could. What about Tyler? When this is over, what happens to him? He'll be taken care of. College, living expenses, protection if he needs it. Your father's debt dies with Victor. And me. Salvatore set down his glass and crossed the room until he was standing directly in front of me. His hand came up to cut my cheek, thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone with surprising gentleness. You already know the answer to that question, Emma. He was right. I did know. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. The girl who'd been driving home from her nursing shift a week ago was gone, replaced by someone who could stand in a library discussing murder and feel nothing but grim satisfaction. When? I asked. Soon. Victor's growing impatient, which makes him sloppy. Sloppy men make mistakes, and mistakes create opportunities. His thumb was still tracing patterns on my cheek, and I found myself leaning into the touch despite every rational thought screaming that this was madness. He was a killer, a criminal, a man whose world was built on violence and fear. But he was also the man who'd pulled me from a burning car, who'd protected me when I had nowhere else to go, who'd made Viktor Kozlovsky's elimination a personal mission because someone had dared to threaten what he considered his. You could walk away, he said quietly. After this is over, I could arrange new identities for you and Tyler. Clean slate, new city, enough money to start over anywhere you wanted. But you don't want me to walk away. No, he admitted, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't identify. I don't. Why? Instead of answering with words, he leaned down and kissed me. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was claiming, possessive, a brand that marked me as thoroughly as any signature on a contract. I should have pulled away, should have maintained the boundaries that kept me safe from his dangerous world. Instead, I kissed him back, pouring months of loneliness and fear and desperate need into the connection between us. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathing hard, and I could see my own desperation reflected in his storm-gray eyes. Anyone who touches you dies, he said against my lips, the words both promise and threat. Anyone who hurts you pays in blood. From now on, you're mine, Emma Walsh, and I protect what's mine. I should have been terrified by the possessive declaration, by the casual way he discussed murder, by the knowledge that I was falling for a man whose hands were stained with blood. Instead, I felt safer than I had since the night my father died, wrapped in the dangerous protection of someone who would burn the world to keep me alive. The knock on my bedroom door came at 2:14 a.m., sharp and urgent. I'd been lying awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and replaying the kiss from earlier. My lips still burned from the memory of Salvatore's mouth on mine, from the possessive way he'd claimed me with nothing more than a touch. Emma. His voice came through the heavy oak, tight with controlled panic. I need you to get dressed. Now. I threw on jeans and a sweater, my heart hammering as I opened the door to find him fully clothed despite the hour. His usual immaculate appearance was slightly disheveled, dark hair falling across his forehead, and there was something in his storm-gray eyes that made my blood run cold. What's wrong? I asked, though part of me already knew. The careful balance we'd maintained was about to shatter. Tyler's here, he said simply. The words hit me like a physical blow. What do you mean he's here? He's downstairs, in my office, and he's not alone. I pushed past him, heading for the stairs, but his hand caught my arm gently but firmly. Emma, wait. There's something you need to understand before you see him. Let go of me. The words came out harder than I'd intended, months of worry and fear bleeding into my voice. I need to see my brother. He came here voluntarily, Salvatore continued, not releasing his grip. With Victor's men. He thinks he's making a trade. The hallway tilted around me, and I had to grab the banister for support. A trade for what? You. He believes if he delivers himself to me, Victor will let you live. The cruel irony of it made me want to laugh or cry or scream. Tyler thought he was saving a sister who was already dead, sacrificing himself for someone who was safe in the very house he'd just entered as a prisoner. "Does he know?" I whispered. "That I'm alive?" "No." "And Emma?" Salvatore's jaw tightened. "He's not the only one who thinks you're dead. Victor's people are convinced they succeeded in the car crash. Tyler coming here, trying to negotiate for your life, confirms their success in their minds. So what happens now? Now we have a problem. I can't let Victor's men leave alive, not after they've seen this location. And I can't let Tyler go back to them knowing what he knows about my operation." The implication hung in the air between us like a blade. Tyler had walked into a trap of his own making, and now 3 lives hung in the balance because of a misunderstanding that could have been avoided if I'd been allowed to contact him days ago. "I want to see him," I said firmly. "Emma, think about this. If Tyler sees you alive, if he realizes what's really been happening, it changes everything. The grief, the guilt he's been carrying, the decision to sacrifice himself for you, all of it becomes meaningless in an instant." "Good," I snapped. "Let it be meaningless. Let him stop blaming himself for something that wasn't his fault." Salvatore studied my face for a long moment, then nodded once. "Stay behind me. Don't say anything until I give you permission. These men are armed and desperate, which makes them dangerous even in my own house." We descended the stairs in silence, passing through the elegant hallways that had become familiar over the past week. But now they felt different, charged with tension that made every shadow seem threatening. As we approached Salvatore's office, I could hear voices, one of them achingly familiar. "I don't care what you do to me," Tyler was saying, his voice cracking with emotion. "Just tell me she didn't suffer. Tell me Emma died quickly in that crash." My heart shattered. My 17-year-old brother, who should have been worried about college applications and prom dates, was negotiating with killers because he thought his big sister was dead. Salvatore paused at the office door, his hand on the handle. "Remember what I said. Stay behind me. Don't speak." The scene that greeted us was like something from a nightmare. Tyler sat in one of the leather chairs facing Salvatore's desk, his hands zip-tied behind his back, and a purple bruise darkening his left cheek. 2 men flanked him, both wearing the kind of cheap suits that screamed muscle for hire. Their hands rested casually on the guns holstered under their jackets. Tyler looked older than his 17 years, aged by grief and guilt, and the kind of desperate courage that only came from having nothing left to lose. When he saw Salvatore enter, his chin lifted defiantly. "You're Romano," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am." Salvatore moved behind his desk with fluid grace, every inch the predator sizing up his prey. "And you're Tyler Walsh. You've caused me a considerable amount of trouble." "I did what they told me to do," Tyler replied, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "I gave them information about Emma's schedule. I installed the tracker. I did everything Victor wanted, and she's still dead." One of Victor's men, a thin man with dead eyes and prison tattoos crawling up his neck, stepped forward. "The boy fulfilled his part of the bargain, Mr. Romano. Victor is prepared to consider the debt settled if you make his death quick." "How generous," Salvatore said dryly. "And what makes Victor think he has any authority to negotiate terms in my home?" The second man, broader and scarred, shifted his weight nervously. "We came here in good faith, under flag of truce. There is no truce between Victor Kozlovsky and me," Salvatore replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "There is only the question of whether you die quickly or slowly." I couldn't take it anymore. My brother was sitting 3 feet away from me, ready to die because he thought he'd failed to protect me, and I was hiding behind Salvatore's broad shoulders like a coward. "Tyler," I said, stepping out from behind Salvatore despite his sharp intake of breath. The effect was immediate and devastating. Tyler's face went white, then red, then white again as he struggled to process what he was seeing. The 2 Russians reached for their guns, but Salvatore's men were faster. Suddenly, the office was filled with the metallic click of safeties being disengaged. "Emma?" Tyler's voice was barely a whisper. "You're dead. I saw the news report. Northwestern Memorial confirmed it." "I'm alive," I said, my own voice thick with tears. I'm alive, and I'm okay. And none of this was your fault. But the tracker, the accident, he was hyperventilating now. Great gulping breaths that made his words come out in gasps. Victor said if I helped them find you, they'd make it quick. They said you were going to die anyway because of Dad's debt. Tyler, listen to me. I started toward him, but Salvatore's hand on my shoulder stopped me. The Russians were still armed, still dangerous, and my brother was in the middle of their kill zone. This is impossible, the thin man snarled. The girl died in the crash. We confirmed it. You confirmed what I wanted you to confirm, Salvatore said calmly. Did you really think I'd let Viktor Kozlovsky murder someone under my protection and walk away? Understanding dawned in Tyler's eyes, followed immediately by a rage I'd never seen in my gentle baby brother. You let me think she was dead, he snarled at the Russians. For weeks you let me believe I'd killed my own sister. The debt still stands, the scarred man said desperately. 80,000, plus interest. The girl being alive doesn't change what's owed. Actually, it changes everything, Salvatore replied. He opened his desk drawer and withdrew a stack of papers, spreading them across the mahogany surface. James Walsh's original loan agreement with Victor. Notice the terms of repayment in case of the borrower's death. I couldn't see the papers from where I stood, but I watched the color drain from both Russians' faces as they read. The debt transfers to surviving family members only if said family members are capable of repayment, Salvatore continued. Emma Walsh is a pediatric nurse making $38,000 a year. Her brother is a minor with no income. Neither could reasonably be expected to repay $80,000. Victor won't accept that interpretation, the thin man said, but his voice lacked conviction. Victor won't have a choice. Salvatore's smile was sharp as a blade. Because Victor is going to be too dead to argue. The next few seconds happened so fast I could barely process them. The scarred Russian went for his gun, but Salvatore was faster. The sound of the gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space, and suddenly there was blood spreading across the man's chest as he collapsed. Tyler threw himself sideways out of his chair as chaos erupted. The thin man managed to clear his weapon, but one of Salvatore's guards put 2 bullets in his back before he could fire. The sharp smell of gunpowder filled the air, mixing with the metallic scent of blood. When the violence ended, Tyler was huddled against the bookshelf. His zip-tied hands making it impossible to cover his ears against the ringing gunshots had left behind. I rushed to him, dropping to my knees and pulling his shaking form against my chest. It's over, I whispered into his hair. The same words I'd used to comfort him after nightmares when he was small. It's over, baby brother. You're safe. I thought you were dead. He sobbed against my shoulder. I thought I killed you. You didn't kill me. You saved me. I looked up to find Salvatore watching us, his expression unreadable. If you hadn't installed that tracker, Victor's people never would have found me on that road. Salvatore never would have been in the area to pull me from the wreckage. It was a generous interpretation of events, but Tyler needed to hear it. He needed to understand that his choice, born of fear and desperation, had ultimately led to my salvation rather than my destruction. Salvatore moved around the desk, careful to avoid the spreading pools of blood, and crouched down beside us. With surprising gentleness, he cut Tyler's restraints with a knife that appeared from nowhere. Your sister is right, he said quietly. Everything you did led to her being under my protection. Victor underestimated the strength of that protection. And now he's going to pay for his mistake. Tyler looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. Are you going to kill him? Yes. The simple honesty of the answer seemed to steady Tyler in a way that false reassurances never could. He nodded once, accepting the reality of the world he'd stumbled into. Good, he said, and I saw an echo of my own savage satisfaction reflected in his young face. Someone should make him pay for what he did to our family. In that moment, I realized that Tyler and I had both crossed lines we could never uncross. We were no longer the innocent siblings who'd been grieving our father's death and struggling to make ends meet. We were something else now, something harder and more dangerous. We were family to Salvatore Romano, and that meant everything had changed forever. 2 days after the shootout in Salvatore's office, I found myself sitting across from Tyler in the mansion's breakfast room, watching him devour a stack of pancakes like he hadn't eaten in weeks, which, knowing my brother's tendency to forget meals when he was stressed, might have been close to the truth. "These are incredible," he said, around a mouthful of food, gesturing with his fork at the chef's handiwork. "Do you eat like this every day?" "The food is better than our usual," I admitted, sipping coffee from bone china that probably cost more than our monthly grocery budget used to. It felt surreal, this domestic scene playing out in the aftermath of such violence. But Tyler seemed to be adapting to the luxury with the resilience that only teenagers possessed. "Emma," he said, his expression growing serious as he set down his fork. "What you said the other night, about me saving you by installing that tracker. We both know that's not really what happened." I'd been dreading this conversation, but my brother deserved honesty after everything he'd been through. "No, it's not. But Tyler, you were 17 years old, threatened by men who'd already killed our father. You made the only choice you could with the information you had. I betrayed you," he said quietly. "I gave them everything they needed to hurt you, and I did it because I was scared. You were protecting us both the only way you knew how," I countered. "And in the end, it worked out. Because of him." Tyler's gaze flicked toward the doorway where Salvatore had appeared, dressed in his usual immaculate suit despite the early hour. "Because he was there when you needed him." Salvatore entered the room with that fluid grace that never failed to make my pulse quicken. He poured himself coffee from the silver service, the domestic action at odds with the controlled violence I'd witnessed just days before. "How are you feeling, Tyler?" he asked, settling into the chair at the head of the table. The question was casual, but I could see him assessing my brother with those sharp gray-blue eyes. "Better," Tyler replied. "Confused, but better. Emma says you've been protecting us both. Protection comes with a price," Salvatore said carefully. "I need you to understand that." I tensed, recognizing the tone. This wasn't a casual breakfast conversation. This was negotiation. The kind that would determine what happened to Tyler and me once Victor was eliminated. "What kind of price?" Tyler asked, proving he'd inherited more of our father's business sense than I'd realized. "Loyalty, discretion, an understanding that what you've seen here, what you know about my operations, can never be shared with anyone outside this room." Tyler nodded slowly. "I get that. But what about after? When this is over? What happens to Emma and me?" Salvatore's gaze found mine across the table, and I saw something there that made my breath catch. Want, yes, but also something deeper, something that looked dangerously close to love. "That depends on your sister," he said. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I knew what he was asking, what choice he was offering me. Stay and become part of his world permanently, or take the new identities and clean slate he'd mentioned before, walk away from the safety of his protection and the dangerous intensity of whatever was growing between us. "I need to know something first," I said, setting down my coffee cup with hands that trembled slightly. "The debt my father owed. The money that started all of this. You said Victor's interpretation of the loan terms was wrong. It was, but you could have used those same terms to void the debt entirely, couldn't you? From the beginning?" Salvatore was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Yes. Then why didn't you? Why let me think I was in danger? Why go through all of this?" Tyler looked between us, sensing the undercurrents in the conversation that went far beyond financial obligations and Russian gangsters. "Because," Salvatore said finally, "the first time I saw you in that hospital room, sitting beside your father's bed and reading to him even though he couldn't hear you, I knew I wanted you in my life. The debt gave me an excuse to protect you. The threat from Victor gave me a reason to keep you close. The honesty of the admission hit me like a physical blow. Everything. From the moment he'd found me in that wrecked car to the luxury prison of the past week, had been orchestrated around his desire to possess me. You manipulated this entire situation," I said, anger and something else entirely warring in my chest. "You let me believe I was in mortal danger so I'd be grateful for your protection." "Yes. No excuses, no justifications. Just the simple truth that he'd engineered my dependence on him because he wanted me and wasn't willing to risk losing me to choice. I should have been furious, should have felt violated by the manipulation, betrayed by the lies. Instead, I felt oddly relieved that the pretense was finally over. No more games, no more carefully constructed reasons why I needed to stay. Just the raw truth that Salvatore Romano wanted me and had used every resource at his disposal to make it happen. "Emma," Tyler's voice cut through my internal turmoil. "What are you thinking?" I looked at my brother, really looked at him. He was 17, smart, resilient, but still young enough to need stability and guidance. In Salvatore's world, he could have both: college, protection, opportunities that would never have been available to a kid from our neighborhood. And me? What did I want? The answer came with startling clarity. I wanted the man who'd pulled me from a burning car and refused to let me go. I wanted the dangerous protector who'd killed for me without hesitation. I wanted Salvatore Romano, manipulation and all, because he'd shown me a version of myself I'd never known existed. "I want to see the contracts," I said finally. "The original loan documents, the terms Victor was operating under. Everything." Salvatore nodded and left the room, returning minutes later with a thick manila folder. I spread the papers across the breakfast table, Tyler leaning over my shoulder as I read through the legal jargon. It was all there, exactly as Salvatore had said. The debt had been James Walsh's alone, non-transferable upon death, unless surviving family members had both the means and legal obligation to assume it. Neither Tyler nor I qualified on either count. "Victor knew this," I said, looking up at Salvatore. "He had to know the debt wasn't legally enforceable against us." Of course he knew. But Victor's never been particularly concerned with legal niceties. He saw an opportunity to expand his territory and took it, using your father's death as an excuse to eliminate potential threats to his operations. Threats like you. Threats like me. I closed the folder and pushed it away, my decision crystallizing with each heartbeat. "Tyler, how do you feel about Northwestern University? Full scholarship, all expenses paid." My brother's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Very serious. But it would mean accepting that our lives have changed permanently. No going back to our old apartment, our old struggles. You'd be under Salvatore's protection, which means following his rules." Tyler looked at Salvatore with a maturity that broke my heart. "What kind of rules?" "The kind that keep you alive and successful," Salvatore replied. "Good grades, smart choices, loyalty to family. The same rules Emma will follow as my wife." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Wife. Not girlfriend, not lover, not temporary arrangement. Wife, with all the permanence and commitment that implied. "Is that a proposal?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's a statement of intent." His gray-blue eyes held mine with unwavering intensity. "I don't share what's mine, Emma, and I don't let go. I should have demanded romance, should have insisted on courtship and declarations of love. But this wasn't a fairy tale. And Salvatore Romano wasn't a prince. He was a king in his own dark kingdom, and he was offering me a crown." "Tyler?" I asked, giving my brother veto power over a decision that would affect both our lives. He was quiet for a long moment, studying Salvatore with the careful attention our father had taught him to give important decisions. Finally, he nodded. "I think," he said slowly, "that you've been taking care of me my whole life. Maybe it's time someone took care of you." "Then I guess I have my answer," I said, looking directly at Salvatore. "Yes." The word was barely out of my mouth before he was moving, circling the table in 2 long strides and pulling me to my feet. His hands framed my face as he kissed me, deep and possessive and claiming. When we broke apart, I was breathless and dizzy, and completely certain I'd made the right choice. "There's no going back," he warned against my lips. "Good," I replied. "I'm tired of running." That night, after Tyler had been settled in his own wing of the mansion with enough video games and premium cable to keep any teenager occupied, Salvatore led me to his bedroom. Not the guest suite I'd been occupying, but his private sanctuary at the heart of the house. It was masculine and elegant, all dark wood and rich fabrics, with windows that looked out over the gardens I'd admired from a distance. But I barely noticed the decor because Salvatore was looking at me like I was something precious and dangerous, and entirely his. "You're not just mine," he said, echoing words from days before. "I'm yours too, Emma Walsh. Heart, soul, and everything in between. When he kissed me this time, it was different. Not the desperate claiming of before, but something deeper. A promise. A vow. A sealing of the bargain we'd struck over breakfast coffee and brutal honesty. And when he made love to me in the massive bed that would now be ours, it wasn't just possession or desire. It was belonging, the kind that went bone deep and changed everything it touched. Later, wrapped in silk sheets, with Salvatore's arm around me and his steady heartbeat against my ear, I realized I wasn't the same woman who'd been driving home from her nursing shift 2 weeks ago, that Emma had been surviving, existing, making do with less than she deserved. This Emma had everything: protection, luxury, love that came with sharp edges and absolute devotion. Most importantly, she had choice. Not the illusion of choice, but real power in a partnership with someone strong enough to handle whatever she brought to the table. No regrets? Salvatore asked quietly, his fingers tracing patterns on my bare shoulder. Only one, I replied, lifting my head to meet his gaze. That it took a car accident to bring us together. His smile was sharp and satisfied. I would have found another way. I told you, Emma. I don't let go of what's mine. And as his arms tightened around me in the darkness, I realized I didn't want him to. The call came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after I'd officially become Salvatore's fiancée. I'd been asleep in his arms when his phone erupted with the harsh buzzing that meant emergency. He was awake instantly, the predator's instincts that had kept him alive for decades pulling him from sleep to full alertness in seconds. "Romano," he answered, his voice already sharp with focus. I watched his expression change as he listened, saw the muscle in his jaw tighten with controlled fury. "When?" A pause. "How many men does he have with him?" Another pause. Longer this time. "No, don't engage. Fall back and maintain surveillance. I'm on my way." He ended the call and was already moving, pulling on clothes with the efficient motions of someone who'd dressed for war countless times before. "What's wrong?" I asked, though the cold knot in my stomach already knew. "Victor's made his move. He's at the old warehouse district with Tyler." The words hit me like ice water. "That's impossible. Tyler's here. He's in his room." Salvatore's expression was grim as he buckled on a shoulder holster. "Check for yourself." I ran down the hall in my silk nightgown, my bare feet silent on the marble floors. Tyler's room was empty, his bed unslept in, the window standing open to the October night. On his pillow was a note written in his careful handwriting. "I'm sorry. I have to fix this. Victor contacted me tonight. He says if I come alone, he'll end the debt and leave you both alone forever. I know you'll try to stop me, but this is my choice. I love you, Em. Take care of yourself." "He's 17 years old," I said, when Salvatore found me standing frozen in Tyler's doorway. "He still thinks he can fix this by sacrificing himself. Victor's counting on that. He knows Tyler feels guilty about his role in your accident. He's using that guilt to draw him out." I turned to face him, noting the tactical vest he now wore beneath his jacket, the additional weapons that had appeared on his person. "You're going after him. We're going after him," Salvatore corrected. "This ends tonight, Emma. One way or another. I'm not trained for this kind of thing," I protested, though I was already moving toward our bedroom to find clothes more appropriate for a rescue mission than silk lingerie. "You're a trauma nurse who's been learning to shoot for the past 3 weeks. And more importantly, you're Tyler's sister. If something goes wrong, if he's injured, I'll need your medical skills." The reminder of the shooting lesson Salvatore had insisted on sent a chill through me. I'd thought they were just part of learning to live in his world, insurance against a future threat. I'd never imagined I'd need those skills so soon. 20 minutes later, I was dressed in black jeans and a tactical vest of my own, a Glock 19 holstered at my hip, and my medical bag slung over my shoulder. I felt like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life, except the gun was real and heavy against my side, and my brother's life depended on how well I'd learned to use it. "Remember what I taught you," Salvatore said, as we climbed into the back of an armored SUV. "Breathe. Aim center mass. Squeeze, don't jerk. And Emma, if something happens to me, you get Tyler and you run. Don't try to be a hero." The warehouse district at 4 a.m. was a landscape from a nightmare. Abandoned buildings stretched for blocks, their broken windows like dead eyes staring out at the empty streets. Our convoy of 3 vehicles moved without headlights, navigating by street lamps and the pale glow of the city beyond. "There," said Lorenzo, Salvatore's lieutenant, pointing to a building in the distance where warm light spilled from several windows. "That's where they are. My men count 8 vehicles, maybe 30 personnel." Salvatore studied the building through binoculars. "Victor's not taking any chances. He knows this is his last play." "What's the plan?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "Simple. We go in, we get Tyler, we kill everyone who tries to stop us." The matter-of-fact way he said it should have horrified me. Instead, I felt a savage satisfaction that my brother's captors would pay for their mistake. The approach was carefully coordinated. Salvatore's men had been planning for this contingency for weeks, and it showed in the precision of their movements. We left the vehicles 4 blocks away and approached on foot, using abandoned buildings and shipping containers for cover. I stayed close to Salvatore, my heart hammering as we crept through the industrial maze. The weight of the gun at my hip was both comforting and terrifying, a reminder that I might have to take a life before the night was over. "Movement on the roof," Lorenzo whispered into his radio. "2 snipers, northeast corner. Take them out quietly," Salvatore replied. "We go in 60 seconds. I watched through a crack in a shipping container as 2 of Salvatore's men scaled the side of the building with spider-like efficiency. The snipers never knew what hit them. "Go." The next few minutes were chaos orchestrated with military precision. Salvatore's men moved like ghosts, taking out Victor's sentries with suppressed weapons and tactical coordination that spoke of serious training. This wasn't just a construction crew with guns. This was a private army. We entered through a service door that had been quietly cleared by the advance team. The interior of the warehouse was a maze of crates and machinery, perfect for an ambush, but also perfect for infiltration if you knew what you were doing. The sound of voices led us deeper into the building. Victor's voice, heavily accented and filled with the kind of casual cruelty I'd come to associate with him from recordings. And Tyler, trying to sound brave but unable to hide the fear in his young voice. "You came alone, just like you promised," Victor was saying as we crept closer. "Very admirable. Very stupid, but admirable." "I kept my word," Tyler replied. "Now keep yours. Leave my sister and Salvatore alone." Victor's laughter was like breaking glass. "Oh, my young friend. Did you really think it would be that simple? Your sister cost me 3 good men and considerable face in the community. That kind of debt requires payment in blood. You said if I came, you'd let them go. I said I'd end the debt. I never said they'd survive it. I saw red. Without thinking, I stepped around the corner with my gun drawn, medical training overridden by protective fury. "Get away from my brother, you son of a bitch!" The scene that greeted me was worse than I'd imagined. Tyler was zip-tied to a chair in the center of the warehouse floor, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. Victor stood behind him with a knife pressed to Tyler's throat, flanked by 6 armed men in tactical gear. "Emma Walsh," Victor said with mock delight. "The dead girl who refused to stay dead. How inconvenient." "Let him go," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is between you and me. Actually, it's between me and him," Victor said, nodding toward the shadows where Salvatore emerged with his own weapon drawn. The great Salvatore Romano, come to rescue his little pet and her troublesome brother. "Victor," Salvatore said calmly, "you made a mistake coming after what's mine. What's yours?" Victor pressed the knife harder against Tyler's throat, drawing a thin line of blood. The boy came to me willingly. The girl was always mine to take. "You have no claim here." "I have every claim. Emma is my fiancé. Tyler is her family, which makes him my family. And family," Salvatore's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, "is sacred." The standoff stretched for an eternity, measured in heartbeats. Victor's men had their weapons trained on Salvatore and me, but I could see Salvatore's people moving through the shadows, getting into position. Any second, this powder keg would explode. "You know what I find interesting?" Victor mused, still holding the knife to my brother's throat. "The boy feels so guilty about betraying his sister. He actually believes this is his fault. It's not his fault, I said firmly. It's yours. Ah, but that's where you're wrong. You see, young Tyler here has been very helpful, not just with the tracker, but with other information as well. Haven't you, Tyler? My brother's face crumpled with shame. Emma, I'm sorry. He said if I told him about Salvatore's security, about the layout of the house, he'd make it quick for both of you. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, but not because I blamed Tyler, because I finally understood the depth of Victor's manipulation, the way he'd used my brother's love for me as a weapon against us both. Tyler, I said softly, look at me. He raised his eyes, tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry, Em. I thought I was protecting you. You were protecting me. You've always protected me. And now, I'm going to protect you. I saw the moment Victor realized his mistake. He'd been so focused on Salvatore, so confident in his superior numbers, that he'd forgotten the most dangerous person in any situation is someone with nothing left to lose. I didn't hesitate. The Glock was in my hands and firing before Victor could react. The first shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him away from Tyler. The second caught him in the chest as he tried to bring his own weapon up. Then all hell broke loose. Salvatore's men opened fire from their concealed positions, cutting down Victor's soldiers with practiced efficiency. I dove behind a crate as bullets whined overhead, my hands shaking as I reloaded with movements drilled into muscle memory over weeks of training. Tyler, I shouted over the gunfire. Stay down! My brother had managed to tip his chair over, using it as minimal cover while still bound. I could see him trying to work free of his restraints, but the zip ties were too tight. A figure appeared around the edge of my crate, weapon raised. I didn't think, just fired. The man dropped, and I felt a savage satisfaction that should have terrified me but didn't. He'd threatened my family. In Salvatore's world, that was a death sentence. The gunfight lasted maybe 3 minutes, though it felt like hours. When the smoke cleared, Victor's men were down and Salvatore was moving toward Tyler with a knife to cut his restraints. But Victor wasn't done yet. I saw him rising from behind a pallet where he'd taken cover, blood streaming from his wounds, but his eyes still filled with hatred. He had a gun in his hand, and it was pointed at Salvatore's back. I didn't shout a warning. There wasn't time. I just put 3 bullets center mass into Viktor Kozlovsky, watching him fall back with a satisfaction that went bone deep. It's over, I said, lowering my weapon as Salvatore cut Tyler free. It's finally over. Tyler fell into my arms, both of us shaking with adrenaline and relief in the aftermath of violence. I thought I'd gotten you killed, he sobbed against my shoulder. You saved us, I replied, meaning every word. If you hadn't come here, Victor would have kept hunting us forever. This way, it's finished. Salvatore approached us, his own weapon holstered. We need to move. Police response time in this area is about 15 minutes. As we walked out of the warehouse, stepping over the bodies of our enemies, I realized something fundamental had changed inside me. The woman who'd been driving home from her nursing shift 3 weeks ago was gone forever, replaced by someone who could kill to protect her family and feel no regret. I was no longer Emma Walsh, pediatric nurse and struggling guardian. I was Emma Romano, the future wife of a man who ruled through violence and fear, and I was exactly where I belonged. 6 months after Viktor Kozlovsky's death, I stood in the bridal suite of St. Anthony's Cathedral, adjusting the antique lace veil that had belonged to Salvatore's grandmother. The woman staring back at me from the full-length mirror was barely recognizable as the exhausted nurse who'd been driving home from a double shift that night in October. This Emma had learned to shoot with deadly accuracy. This Emma could discuss money laundering over dinner without flinching. This Emma wore a custom Valentino wedding dress that cost more than most people's annual salary and felt perfectly comfortable in it. You look beautiful, Em, Tyler said from behind me, his voice thick with emotion. He'd grown 3 inches in 6 months, and filled out with the kind of confidence that came from knowing he was protected by one of the most powerful families in Chicago. Northwestern University had accepted him early admission with a full scholarship, courtesy of the Romano Foundation's educational initiative. You clean up pretty well yourself, I replied, turning to admire my brother in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. The scared 17-year-old who'd sacrificed himself to save me was gone, replaced by a young man who understood the weight of family loyalty and wore it well. A soft knock interrupted our moment. Mrs. Romano? The wedding coordinator peered around the door, her eyes bright with the kind of excitement that came from organizing a wedding with an unlimited budget. It's time. Mrs. Romano. In 10 minutes. That would be my legal name. Emma Catherine Romano, wife of Salvatore Romano, First Lady of an empire built on carefully controlled violence and legitimate business ventures that had grown exponentially under my influence. The cathedral was packed with 300 guests, a mix of Chicago's political elite, business leaders, and carefully vetted members of Salvatore's organization. I'd insisted on transparency about what kind of wedding this was. Everyone who sat in those pews knew exactly who they were celebrating. As the wedding march began, Tyler offered me his arm. "Ready?" he asked. "I've been ready since the night he pulled me from that car," I replied. The walk down the aisle felt like a victory parade. Mayor Davidson nodded respectfully from the third row. Federal Judge Morrison, whose daughter's life I'd saved in the pediatric ward 2 months ago, smiled warmly from the fifth. The careful balance Salvatore had built between legitimacy and his darker enterprises was on full display, and I was about to become its centerpiece. But none of that mattered the moment I saw him waiting at the altar. Salvatore stood like a king in his domain, immaculate in a charcoal gray morning coat that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean frame. His dark hair was perfectly styled, but I could see the small scar on his chin that I'd traced with my fingers countless times. His gray-blue eyes found mine immediately, and the intensity in them made my breath catch just like it had that first night. When Tyler placed my hand in Salvatore's, I felt the familiar jolt of electricity that connected us. His fingers were warm and steady, a reminder of all the ways those hands had touched me, protected me, claimed me. "Dearly beloved," Father Benedetto began, his voice carrying easily through the cathedral's soaring architecture. The ceremony itself was traditional, Catholic, binding in ways both legal and spiritual. But when Salvatore spoke his vows, his voice clear and strong enough for everyone to hear, the words were anything but traditional. "Emma," he said, his eyes never leaving mine, "you saved me from a life of existing without truly living. You brought light into darkness I'd accepted as permanent. You made me believe in something beyond power and control and careful survival. I promise to protect you, to cherish you, to build an empire worthy of the queen you already are. And I promise that what we have will be sacred, always." My own vows were equally unconventional. "Salvatore, you didn't just rescue me from that car. You rescued me from a life too small for what I was meant to become. You showed me strength I didn't know I possessed, courage I'd never needed before. I promise to stand beside you, to be your partner in everything we build together. And I promise that no matter how dangerous our world becomes, you'll never face it alone." When Father Benedetto pronounced us husband and wife, Salvatore's kiss was both gentle and possessive, a claiming that made my toes curl in my designer heels. The cathedral erupted in applause, but all I could hear was the thundering of my own heart. The reception was held at the Palmer House, the ballroom transformed into something from a fairy tale with orchids and candlelight and enough security to protect a head of state. I danced with my new husband to a string quartet's rendition of "At Last," feeling like I was floating in the protective circle of his arms. "Any regrets, Mrs. Romano?" he asked as we swayed together, oblivious to the hundreds of guests watching our every move. "Only that it took a car accident to bring us together," I replied, echoing words from months before, "though I suppose some things are worth the wait. I would have found another way," he said seriously. "I told you before, Emma, I don't let go of what's mine." During dinner, Tyler gave a speech that had half the room in tears. He talked about second chances and family loyalty, and the man who'd given us both a future neither of us had dared to dream of. When he finished, he raised his champagne glass in a toast. "To my sister Emma, who taught me that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is trust someone completely. And to Salvatore, who proved that sometimes the most dangerous people are exactly the ones worth trusting. To new beginnings and old traditions, and to a family that chooses loyalty over everything else. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself on the hotel's terrace with Chicago spread out below us like a glittering kingdom. Salvatore appeared beside me, having shed his formal jacket and loosened his tie. Even disheveled, he looked like he could rule the world. "Satisfied with your wedding, Mrs. Romano?" he asked, sliding his arms around me from behind. "Satisfied with my husband," I corrected, leaning back against his chest. "The wedding was just a party, an important party. 300 witnesses to the fact that Emma Walsh is dead and gone, and Emma Romano has taken her place." He was right. The woman who'd worked 16-hour shifts to pay rent on a crumbling apartment, who'd worried about Tyler's college prospects and her father's unpaid debts, had died in that car crash. The woman who'd emerged from Salvatore's protection was someone else entirely. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a key, antique and ornate, clearly from somewhere significant. "What's this for?" I asked, though something told me I already knew. "The Children's Hospital of Chicago is opening a new wing next month, the Emma Romano Pediatric Center. Your own domain, fully funded by the Family Foundation, staffed with the best doctors money can hire. You'll oversee all medical decisions." Tears pricked my eyes. He'd given me everything I'd never known I wanted. Power, protection, purpose that went beyond mere survival. But more than that, he'd given me a way to use my old skills in my new world. "You'll be able to help children the way you always wanted to," he continued. "But now you'll have unlimited resources to do it. No insurance denials, no budget constraints, no choosing between treatments based on cost." "Salvatore," I turned in his arms, struck speechless by the magnitude of the gift. "You gave up your career to be with me. It seemed only fair that I give you something better in return." 3 months later, I stood in the gleaming new pediatric wing, watching a team of the world's best cardiac surgeons repair a defect in 6-year-old Maria Santos's heart. The surgery would have been impossible at most hospitals, the cost prohibitive for her family. Here, it was Tuesday. "Mrs. Romano?" Dr. Chen, the head of pediatric surgery, appeared at my elbow. "The Martinez family is here for their consultation. Are you ready?" I nodded, smoothing my white coat over the designer dress beneath. The title felt as natural now as Emma Romano did. I'd become someone who could authorize million-dollar treatments with the same ease as ordering lunch, someone whose word was law in this sterile kingdom of healing. "Mrs. Romano," little Jimmy Martinez said when I entered the consultation room. He was 8 years old with leukemia, and eyes that were too old for his face. "Are you really going to make me better?" "We're going to try our very best," I promised, crouching down to his level. "And we have the best doctors in the world here just for you." That evening, I came home to find Salvatore in his study, reviewing reports from his various enterprises. The legitimate businesses had tripled their revenue since our marriage, partly because of my organizational skills, but mostly because Emma Romano opened doors that had been closed to Salvatore alone. "Good day?" he asked, pulling me onto his lap as I settled into the familiar routine of sharing our separate but connected work. "Maria Santos's surgery was successful. Jimmy Martinez starts treatment next week. And we're breaking ground on the research facility in January." I curled against his chest, breathing in the cologne that had become my favorite scent in the world. "What about you?" "The Port Authority approved our construction bid. The new shipping facility will be operational by summer." He didn't need to spell out what kind of shipments would be moving through Romano facilities. I'd learned not to ask questions I didn't need answers to. "Tyler called," I said. "He's made Dean's List again, and he's bringing someone home for Thanksgiving." "Someone?" "Her name is Sarah. Pre-med, honor society. Apparently everything he talks about lately." I smiled at the thought of my baby brother in love. "He wants your permission to bring her to family dinner." "Of course." Salvatore's arms tightened around me. "She'll need to be vetted, naturally. Background check, family history, the usual security measures." I'd learned that the usual security measures for Romano family members were extensive enough to rival FBI clearances. But Sarah would pass. Tyler had good instincts about people, and he'd never bring someone dangerous into our world. "There's something else," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Dr. Castellano wants to schedule a consultation next week." Salvatore went very still beneath me. What kind of consultation? The kind that involves discussing prenatal vitamins and birthing centers. I pulled back to meet his eyes. Seeing the moment understanding dawned. I'm pregnant, Salvatore. 8 weeks. The expression that crossed his face was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Wonder, protectiveness, joy, and a vulnerability that made my chest tight. His hand moved immediately to my still flat stomach, spreading wide as if he could feel the life growing there. You're sure? He asked quietly. Dr. Castellano ran the test twice. We're having a baby. He kissed me then, deep and claiming and reverent all at once. When we broke apart, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. A baby, he repeated, like he was testing the words. Our baby. Are you happy? I asked, though the answer was written all over his face. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. His thumb traced circles on my stomach. She'll be perfect. Beautiful and strong and completely protected from anything that could hurt her. She? Instinct. His smile was soft and wondering. And if I'm wrong, he'll be just as perfect. That night, as we lay in our bed with Chicago glittering beyond the windows and Salvatore's hand resting protectively over our unborn child, I thought about the woman I'd been before the accident. She'd been surviving, making do, accepting less than she deserved because she didn't know anything better existed. This woman, Emma Romano, had everything. A husband who would kill for her without hesitation. A brother thriving under protection and opportunity. Work that mattered. Resources to help anyone who needed it. And now, a child who would grow up knowing nothing but love and safety and power. No regrets? Salvatore asked quietly, echoing our wedding night conversation. Only one, I replied, settling deeper into his embrace. That it took me 26 years to find you. He laughed softly. I would have waited longer if necessary. Some things are worth any price. And as his arms tightened around me and our child, I knew he was right. The girl who'd been trapped in that burning car had died in the wreckage. The woman who'd emerged from Salvatore Romano's protection had been reborn into a life bigger and more dangerous and more beautiful than anything she'd ever imagined possible. I was exactly where I belonged. Finally, completely, forever home.